Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we have a Kickstarter preview for the Scarlet Pimpernel. This is from Eagle Gryphon Games. It is a 2 to 6 player competitive game with a little bit of cooperation for sure.
Yeah, so it is technically a worker placement game in which you're going to be placing followers up on the board, trying to gain some area majority on some special favorite tiles to gain you victory points through the course of the game. But let's first talk about the history behind this game, because we had no idea what the Scarlet Pimpernel was. History lesson. In 1793, there was a French committee that was persecuting people and throwing them underneath the guillotine, and there was a man called Sir Percy Blakeney.
Oh, nice pronunciation.
Who became the Scarlet Pimpernel, and he had a group of followers that would dedicate themselves to saving the civilians, and he would leave a small pimpernel flower in locations where they had been. So basically what you're doing here is you are representing the followers of the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Yeah, each player is going to be a follower, and you're basically trying to help the Pimpernel accomplish his missions, and there's a variety of missions that he needs to accomplish for sure.
So there is a giant board, and this board is broken into 4 different regions with a bunch of routes and cards running through them. The 4 regions are England, you have northern France, and then you have the city proper itself of Paris on the south side of the board. And over on the east-hand side, you have Austria. You're going to be moving your followers from one location to the next, trying to put your pawns or your cubes onto locations and influence them.
Right. The game largely revolves around these 4 sections, but you're not moving on these routes that you see on the board here. You're going to be basically just moving from section to section, noting that Austria can only be accessed from northern France.
Right. On the board itself, I said there's a number of different cards. These are randomly set up, as well as the building tiles that you see. These will allow you to place your cubes on them to interact with them to be able to gain special favors. There's routes on the board. These are places, again, where you're going to be placing your cubes, trying to gain victory points by leading the Scarlet Pimpernel to his mission locations. Across the top of the board, you have your planning area. These are places of influence that will get you special favor tiles, and special cards will give you abilities through the course of the game.
Yeah, and these special favor cards are actually yet another variable element of setup. The tiles are going to be the same every time, but those cards are going to give different powers every time you play the game.
Across the very top right-hand corner of the board, you have 5 locations where you can also place your cubes. These will give you benefits of letting you choose how things are scored at the end of the round. It may give you the first player marker. It may allow you to choose missions on where the Scarlet Pimpernel can interact in the next round, because that's extremely important to scoring points, because you can kind of set yourself up to be able to have area majority in specific areas.
Right, there's a lot of different routes to scoring points in this game, and it's got a very interesting element of trying to determine what your opponents are going to be doing and where you need to go to try to get your points.
The mission cards themselves will give you the parameters by which you're scoring points. There's 2 mission cards that are always in play. They kind of stack up like this to form a quantity of each of the different types of favors that you're trying to give to the Scarlet Pimpernel. There's some upcoming missions, so you can kind of plan ahead and figure out where you want to be in specific areas for the next mission. There's a giant stack of missions. This game is going to take place over 7 rounds, so there's always going to be new missions that are going to be introduced. And on the very bottom, you're going to have Vienna, because that's where the Scarlet Pimpernel will end the game on the 7th round. Finally, each player is going to have a player board in front of them. Player board's very simple. It's just going to show you the 3 actions that you can take on your turn. And you'll be given a number of these small cubes, which are basically your workers. That's going to depend upon the number of players that are participating in the game.
Yeah, and Jeremy mentioned the simplicity of the gameplay is very, very easy.
Yeah.
There's 3 things you can do. The complexity of this game comes in with all the scoring.
Yep.
So on your turn, you're going to do one of 3 things. And again, these things can kind of spiral a little bit, but we'll go through them as quickly as we can.
Yeah, before we get into that, let's talk about how the Scarlet Pimpernel sets up. He's going to start in a very specific location in the game. Each of the players is going to start in the region where the Scarlet Pimpernel is. Also, the missions that come up will tell you exactly where he is trying to go to. In this case, he's trying to get from Calais all the way down to the West Barricade. So once that gets completed, we may go into the next round.
Yeah, and that's going to change from round to round. But starting with the first round, the first player is going to do one of their 3 actions. And the first thing is very simple. It's moving.
Yeah, they can simply move. As I said, each of the different players' followers will start in the region where the Scarlet Pimpernel is located. Now, it's very important to understand that these aren't locations where the followers are going to be moving. It's the entire location itself. So everyone is in North France. So you just simply place your guy anywhere in North France. If you wish to move, you're moving from adjacent locations. So I could go up to England, I could go down to Paris, or I could go to Austria. Now it's important to note that the only way you can get into Austria is through France itself, or northern France itself.
Yeah, basically the way they define adjacency here is sharing a border and having at least one route that's on the board that connects those two sections.
Yep.
So the next thing you can do is really the meat of the game, and this will take a little bit of explaining. This is placing a cube on the board. That might sound simple, but there's a lot of different places you can place your cube. We're going to start with the first one, and this is associated with the mission location itself. Each mission location is going to have, like we said, one of these cards that has a number of different icons on it. You can simply take your cube and place it out on the card. When you do that, you're going to take another one of your cubes and place it in the corresponding location up on the special favor tiles.
So it's important to note here that David placed on a supporter, a blue supporter. When he did that, he also gets to, in addition, place a orange cube in the supporter area as well. There's a ton of different icons on these cards, and they're all randomly set up. Some of them allow you to place in locations when you place on that area as well. Some of them allow you to remove cubes, because removing cubes is typically very hard to do in the game. Once you place down somewhere, it's usually locked in there unless that cube may score and bounce back to your player board. Some of those locations just give you flat-out victory points.
Yeah, flat-out victory points, and some will let you sort of chain into another action potentially.
Yep.
So what's the next thing you can do with your cube? The next thing is to place on a route. As you noticed, on these routes, there's these little squares. When you place a cube on a route, the idea here is that you're wanting to connect that route from wherever the Scarlet Pimpernel is to the mission location. So you'd place anywhere along that route, and there might be multiple routes here, and we'll get into that in a second. But you're going to place on that route, and that's it.
Yeah, now it's important to note, anytime on your turn when you're placing a cube, it typically has to be in the same location where your follower is located. So David's orange follower is located in northern France, meaning that he can only interact with the location cards, the tiles, or the routes in northern France.
Yeah, and that'll come into play, for instance, if the Pimpernel were up in England and the mission location were down in Paris, you'd need to do some moving in order to spread your cubes throughout that entire route.
Yep.
So the next place you can place your cube is the buildings.
Yep.
Why don't you talk about the buildings?
Yeah, so there's a variety of different tiles on the board. These are all randomly set up. Each of these different buildings interact with the planning areas above. You have 6 different possible planning areas. What you're trying to do is place on these locations, which will give you majority of cubes in these. Now let's first talk about the building location. When you place on a building location, in an area that you are located, you simply place it on that building. That's it. That's all you do. However, if you place there again on a future turn, or if someone bumps you off of that, because each of these tiles can only hold 1 cube. If another player goes there, it then bumps you to the corresponding planning area. So David, why don't you go and throw a cube on there? This would bump me up to the wagons, meaning that I have area or majority control of the wagons at this point, because I have the most cubes in there. That allows me to collect that particular favor tile. Each of these favor tiles are the same at the start of the game, numbered 1 through 6, but the favor cards are randomized. These will give you additional abilities to the course of the game. So instead of taking one of those 3 actions that David just told you about, instead I can take the action of my tile. This will give you typically 2 actions. So controlling these is the meat and potatoes of the game. You really want to have flexibility in the game to be able to do multiple actions on a turn.
Right, it gives you multiple actions, and there are ways of controlling who has those and when, and we'll get into that in a minute when we talk about how the missions are scored. And speaking of that, that is the other place where you can place your cube. When you're placing a cube, you can place in this one spot next to any of those 5 missions. Like Jeremy said earlier, that's going to give that player some level of control of how that particular mission is scored during the end of that round.
So Section 1 will allow the player who controls it to score the mission cards. So they're going to be able to pick which one of the cubes will be placed into the scoring portion. We'll get into that in a moment. Section 2 will allow the players to decide which supporters will score on those mission cards. Section 3 will give that player 1 point and the first player marker. Section 4 will allow the player to decide the route of the Scarlet Pimpernel. I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, so for instance, when you're building these routes, you can see a network of different roads here. As you're building routes, people can put on one route, people might put on a different route connecting the 2 locations. If someone's invested a lot of cubes in one route and then you place on that location, you're going to be able to choose a different route So effectively keeping all of those points away from them, because the way it scores is everyone who's on the route that is scored is going to get a point for each of the cubes on that route.
And then gain those cubes back into their supply. The final one allows the players to pick the mission that could be coming up in the next round. So there's always 2 available cards that are in this slot. They get to decide which one of these cards is on top, meaning that they decide where the Scarlet Pimpernel will go in the next round.
And not only that, that person also gets to score the mission location itself. We'd mentioned these cards earlier. If that mission card has a bunch of cubes on it, you're going to take all of those cubes, and every one of those is going to score a point, as well as that person's going to get a bonus point if the mission was completed.
So we've kind of skipped ahead to scoring. Let's kind of reel it back and talk about how a round ends. So the round ends once all the players pass, or if all 5 of these locations have a cube in it.
Right, so it's player controlled for sure. You could very quickly end a round by placing your cube on every turn on one of those mission locations. And that's usually going to be how the mission ends. Like we said, the number of cubes you have is dependent on the number of players. So at a higher player count, there may be fewer cubes as you go around the table, and you might see a lot more passing.
So once everyone passes, you're going to score the different sections of the board. We've talked about some of them already. Let's talk about 1 and 2. You're going to look at these 2 mission cards, and they stack on top of each other, telling you the numeric value of each of these planning areas that will score. For instance, the far one on the left requires 1 that can score, and then you have 2, 2, and 2. So you're basically adding those numbers together. If you picked this location and my cube is in there, I get to decide whose cubes will actually score. So if there's a large number of cubes, say for instance the horses will score only 2 points for this round, but there's 5 cubes in there, I could decide that I want to score my 2 points and let everyone just sit in there for the next round.
Yeah, the cool thing here is, and this gets back to those favor tiles, if Jeremy chooses his 2 cubes to pull down to fulfill the mission, that's going to necessarily mean that he doesn't have any more cubes in that section. Someone will now have the majority. If he had that tile prior, he's going to have to give that tile and the special favor card to a new player.
The same thing works on the people here. You'll look and add these up as well. In this case, it will score possibly 6 cubes. The player that places in this location will once again decide which one of these cubes will score. As we said, a first player will be doled out. The route will be chosen by the player that picks this location. All of those cubes will score from the route from the Pimpernel to his mission location, and then the next player is going to decide how the next mission will set up.
Yeah, and as a bonus, if you've placed cubes in any of those 5 spots, as long as the mission was accomplished, that person's also going to get 1 bonus point.
Yep. So this game, that's basically the game. You're going to play for 7 rounds. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins. It's a very simple game to play.
Yes.
The elegance in the games comes from making really hard decisions about how you want to score your points, the locations of where you're placing, and the timing of all of that to try to gain majority in each of these different special favors.
Yeah, the area majority up here at the top of the board in order to secure those tiles is definitely a driving force that will sort of inform a lot of decisions that players make in the game, because Jeremy and I have played this 2 players, and there was at one point where he had all of the special favor tiles. So it was everything I can do to try to grab 1 or 2 of those away from him. Or I could let him do that, and because he'd invested in that, I had the opportunity of scoring other points that he was overlooking, at least for a round.
Yeah, because it's interesting. If you invest a lot of your cubes in these locations up here, you're not investing your cubes to the board. So all of my cubes were locked into these locations, meaning, yes, I could have 2 actions every round, but I may not have been scoring the points down here where it counts.
Yeah, and he could score some points, of course, on the main mission because he had his cubes up here, unless, of course, I had a few cubes up here, and I was the one determining which ones came down.
Yeah, so again, timing is very important in this game. So if you guys have any questions about the game, this is the Scarlet Pimpernel. It is on Kickstarter right now. It's 2 to 6 players. Plays in about 60 minutes. If you guys have questions, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 2 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored in part by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.